What's going on, Junkie Nation? Gorgeous George and Goes are back with another superstar from the sport of mixed martial arts. Today we get to talk to Michael C. Williams, the master of ceremonies, the in-ring announcer for Bellator MMA. Welcome back, Michael. It's been a long time. April of 2011, show number 976. We're getting close to 3,400 shows. We can't let that many shows go by without talking to you, sir. Glad to have you back.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me back on. It's been a long time. I was trying to think about the beginning of the whole Bellator run, and today, whatever it is now, here we are back again. So I appreciate you having me back on.
Yeah, it was Bellator 42 when we talked to you. Yeah, and this is 299, 300, and 301 coming up here.
Yeah.
How many of those have you done?
So actually, I joined the second calendar year. So I think that was Bellator 13 was my first.
Wow.
Not that I didn't try my very best, and even probably there was a few little white lies in there too. So I tried everything, including that, to get into the very first Bellator 1.
Oh,
but but the gentleman at the time, I'm sure you recognize the name Bjorn. Bjorn was too smart. He sniffed out my little white lie, and it didn't work out. So he brought me in for the start of the second calendar year, which is Bellator's actual their third season, but second calendar year.
Are you going to share what that white lie was?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It's not that big a deal. It was a stretching of the truth more than it was a white lie. But if you remember way back, and most people don't even remember this about Bellator.
Was this when John Anik called the fights, I believe, on ESPN or something like that?
He was the first year.
Yeah.
He was the first year, and then Jimmy Smith and Sean Wheelock took over in the second year, the same time that and the three of us, Jimmy, Sean, and I, kind of came off the Affliction shows at the time. So that's that. And so Jimmy, Sean, and I all worked together at Affliction, and then we ended up at Bellator together too. But yeah, I think Anik called the first year, but he did the English broadcast. The first year Bellator was in Spanish. It was done primarily in Spanish, and it aired primarily in Spanish language. So I actually through just industry contacts, I knew who Bjorn was. We met, we talked, and his first question, and he knew that I was a ring announcer, cage announcer. I did the Affliction shows, and he goes, look, I have one question for you. So I know your work, I know what you do, but I have one question for you. Are you fluent in Spanish? And faced in that moment in time, what would you expect that I was going to say, knowing what the repercussions of my answer was probably going to be?
Claro que sí, Bjorn.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, absolutely. Why do you ask? This is before the first year was even publicly announced that it was in Spanish. I didn't know why he was asking. But I had just come off. I'd started doing professional boxing as a ring announcer in 1995. And I did several shows in Mexico on national TV in Spanish. So wow. I know boxing or ring announcer Spanish. I can do that all day long. So that's how I answered his question. I didn't really take the word fluent to be fluent. I assumed he meant, or at least from my take, I was hoping he meant, can I announce fights in Spanish, which I had just come off a show the week or two prior. So I said yes. And then as we're talking a little bit, his eyebrow kind of curls up and he goes, wait a second. I asked you if you were fluent in Spanish. And that's when I had to admit that I was not. And at the time, that's what he wanted for that first year, because it was primarily a Spanish speaking broadcast. So then it changed in the second year, and then I joined at Bellator 13.
Wow. And I think I would have figured you guys would have crossed paths, because he was in boxing in the 90s, and I know you were in boxing in the 90s, but it all worked out either way, right? And now what? So they're getting close to 300 shows, and it sounds like you've been to about 285 of them yourself.
Yeah. Ever since 13, there's been a couple oddballs in there with COVID, and then some overseas shows where we double booked, or Bellator double booked, and I was in the States, somebody else did the overseas. But all total 260 some odd shows probably.
Has it been just like every year you just renew a new contract? Do you have a lifetime contract? I mean, I can really appreciate, what's that now, a dozen years? No, more than that. I mean, that's quite a run, and it's, a historical run.
Yeah. Yeah, not many things last that long. In fact, very few things last anywhere near as long as my run with Bellator has lasted, and it's been great. There's a couple of changes of ownership in there, change of management in there, but it's always been the teams on both sides at all times have always been great, and it's a real tight knit production. There's a lot of people who've been there for years and years and years, but I think there are three of us that have been there since the beginning-ish. Two guys have been there since Bellator 1, and then me joining in 13, and then so we're the three old guys in the production. But again, a lot of things in the announcing world as a whole, because I've over my 30 years I've done. I toured with Monster Jam, Gravedigger Monster Trucks. I toured with them for 18 seasons while doing combat sports. And so my Monster Jam run went 18 years, and that was the longest. Bellator's 11, 12 years. But again, not many things last, anything more than a half dozen years or so. So I'm very, very, very fortunate in that respect, on top of the fact that the crew, the production, the fighters at Bellator, it is an incredible group of human beings, and it's been a blessing to be a part of it this long.
I would have guessed that once Mercedes moved on from being a ring card girl, that you might have the longest tenure, but there's others that outdo you by a couple shows, huh?
There are two people, in-house producer,
wow.
His name is Stu Wiener, and one of the camera operators, Joe. Those are the two guys that have been there since Bellator.
Incredible. 1. I noticed, obviously, we talked, and this is thevoice.com and the eventannouncing.com website. Check them out. So I was very familiar with the Monster Jam, and I wanted to ask you, that's got to be another set of pipes, right? I mean, maybe I watched too many commercials, but I'll hear them say they're coming to the LA Coliseum. Do you have to get more gravelly? Like, is that a different type of preparation than delivering fights in an enclosed arena? What are these different types of gigs like, the preparation?
So normally, George, when someone tees that up with monster trucks, it inevitably goes down the whole Sunday, some goes, that whole thing, right?
Uh-huh.
Which is actually drag racing, by the way, not monster trucks. That's the origin of that line, that famous sort of phrase.
Yeah.
But yeah, monster. I mean, there's you. I also do. I also host or MC corporate events where I'm in a tuxedo and the whole atmosphere is very low key. There's just a different delivery for these different types of environments. Mm-hmm. And I use the corporate event, lavish, formal affair, smaller, couple thousand people. I use that as an example because that's one extreme, and the other extreme would be a Monster Jam stadium show. I mean, I've announced every major for Monster Jam, every major football and baseball stadium in the country. Wow. The biggest one I've ever done was Edward Jones Dome in St. Louis, and that was 67,000 people in that dome. And so the delivery for that, the presentation, or I refer to it as the delivery for that, is very different. It has very over-the-top elements to it, and yeah, there's some guttural things. There's a lot of throat, throat versus diaphragm, and that kind of presentation. Combat sports ring announcing, it's somewhere on that side of the spectrum, because there's a lot of energy and a lot of in that presentation or that delivery too. It's just not quite as far over the top as you would commonly hear at a Monster Jam show in a stadium of 40, 50,000 people.
Yeah, no, that's something else, man. I saw that the marathons, triathlons, and those are all different types of gigs. Obviously I would never compare the little I've done with what you've done, but we've gone to military bases for a whole weekend, and we do morale visits, and each time you want to give the best to each group, right? Because it's their little 15 minutes to 1 hour where we come in with some fighters, and I want to give the fighters the best intro possible. Michael, by the end of the first day, I got to really start thinking about, do I want to keep pushing it or level out? And I got to start, being careful with what I drink, because otherwise you start to really like lose your voice. You hear about these singers that'll be on a tour and they have to cancel like, 2 weeks worth because they obviously had some sort of a setback.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, at least when they're singing, they're kind of singing their same songs, same sets, whereas you're kind of getting pulled in a lot of different directions to do different types of announcing.
Right. Well, I say you mentioned it a little bit ago. So I do a lot of training and coaching for other announcers, not just ring announcer or combat sports, but monster truck announcers in that space and others, public address, other spaces too. There's one universal truth though, and it goes to what you were just saying. If you're ever feeling anything in your throat, like you're feeling a raspy throat, or you feel like you're losing your voice, it's because you're speaking from your throat. Your the source of your airflow, if you will, the sound that you're originating, it's all coming from up here. It's all in your throat. And that most commonly, by the way, would be referred to or be would reflect some form of yelling versus announcing. And don't get me started on yelling versus announcing, because they're two different things. But if you are able to, and there's a whole element that I coach that's lowering the origin of your sound, or where you produce your sound from your throat down to your diaphragm. And we've all heard probably the word diaphragm. We're not quite sure what it is, but your diaphragm, diaphragmatic breathing, that's the key to never losing your voice again, never getting a raspy throat, because all your airflow, and you can push a lot more airflow too, if that's where you're generating your sound and where your airflow is coming from. But diaphragmatic, or using your diaphragm, as opposed to just bringing air into your upper chest and using your throat, all the difference in the world. So George, next time before you have your next event where this might happen to you, let's get in touch. Let's do a little bit of work, and we'll figure it out before it happens.
When you do your mentoring, and I appreciate you saying that, thank you, I'll take you up on it. When you do your mentoring and coaching, can you take a Mumbles McGee and make them into a great announcer, a competent announcer, or do you have to be born with a certain set of pipes? You can't perform miracles either.
Well, here, I'll give you the bottom line first, then I'll kind of back myself out of it. The bottom line is it's not about voice. It's not about the resonance in a voice. It's just not. There's a lot of people have a great voice, and they hear it. They'll tell you they hear it all the time. Oh, you got a great voice. You should, whatever, be on radio with that. It's not about having a great voice. Because a lot of people have that, but they can't stand up on a stage and actually go through and do everything else, right? So having a voice, sure, it helps, but it's not the bottom line. The bottom line is being able to sort of have some certain command over, different other, vocal technicals, or vocal basics is what we call them when we're coaching. And there's these technicals like articulation, inflection. There's all these different things that you can work on. Anyone can work on. I work with people who aren't even announcers of any kind. They've been tasked for one reason or another to step up on a stage and speak. And some of what I work with is stage fright and getting comfortable on stage. So the bottom line is not about voice. It's never about voice. If you look at ring announcers, right? Cage announcers, ring announcers. If you look through boxing and MMA and you look at the whole group of us, everyone has a very different sounding and tenor or resonance or pitch or tone that we use to our voice. All of us are different. So there isn't any one voice that sort of opens the door or precludes you from doing it. That's not what matters. It's about having these technical skills, the ability, and again, you can, we start at the beginning. When I'm working with somebody, we start digging into vocal basics, which sounds so simple and rudimentary and almost offensive that we would even take the time to talk about these things. But they're building blocks, they're foundations. Then we get into technicals and then variations, and we start really working with inflection and so forth. So the key, the secret, the bottom line, if there is a secret, is me, any other coach or trainer or whatever, none of us know any magic. We can't cast a spell. There's no secret that we can tell you, so you'll be successful or great or sound like you want to sound. None of that exists. I don't certainly. I don't think anyone else knows any magic or has any pixie dust. It's all going to be about how much time that other person is willing to put into practice, rehearsal, and drilling on their own time, not associated with an upcoming event. That's the mistake that a lot of people make. How much time are you willing to put in every single day? Every day, a couple hours a day, every single day. And that even sounds almost ludicrous to a lot of people. But if this is your craft, if you really want to do it full time, if you want to get into this space, that's what it takes. Every day, a routine of practice, drilling, and rehearsal. If you'll put that time in, then I can fill in a lot of the other gaps to take, what took me, 20 some years to figure out on my own, because there was no coaches or trainers or anything like that around, 30 years ago when I was starting out. So if someone's willing to put in that kind of time, then I'm one of the people that can try to fill in all the gaps to cut that 20, 25 year threshold down to, I don't know, whatever, half that or thereabouts.
Okay.
Michael, can you maybe share with us what the biggest difference was between early days Michael C. Williams and Michael C. Williams today?
Well, so rewind back to what I was just saying about not knowing anything and just sort of standing. So when you started, when anyone starts announcing, when I started announcing, I told you about my little white lie with Bellator to try to get in there, and I was announcing a couple things here and there, but nothing major at the time. I hadn't yet begun Monster Jam at the time. I told an even bigger lie to get into boxing, which that was well before Bellator. So, you have to figure out how to get your way in the door. So I was acting, I was playing the part. I was saying, no, I'm a ring announcer. I'm a tour announcer. And then when I got someone to say, yeah, okay, fine, come on in, we'll audition you. Then I had to back it up. I had to figure out how to do that particular, discipline or type of delivery for that type of, event. So I spent the first, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of my career basically just faking it, pretending, emulating, imitating, doing anything that I could that I thought announcers were supposed to do. I was trying to sound like I thought announcers were supposed to sound. At the time, that seemed very reasonable. It made perfect sense to me. And I kept getting work. I wasn't getting all that more successful. I wasn't getting paid anything more really, because my value wasn't increasing in any way, shape, or form throughout that first maybe 10 years, decade. It's feel like a long time, but so just sort of trying to do what I think an announcer is supposed to do. And then there was some point in there where I just realized, well, there's got to be a better way than this. So I went looking for training or coaching or mentoring, and there was nothing out there. So then I just became an absolute student of the craft. And I began, YouTube was, this is going to date me a little bit, but YouTube was just starting to get big at the time. So there's more and more content on YouTube and online as a whole. And I was renting VHS tapes from Blockbuster, every event, all the UFC events, all the boxing shows, everything that I could possibly find, just to try to figure out, what's beyond just, imitating or doing what I think. What do I need to learn? And that's that now is the foundation of all the training and coaching that I do now, is that process that I went through to learn, break things down, figure them out, write them down, capture them, and then getting into routines like practicing and drilling and rehearsing. I've talked to myself more than any other human being probably has on the face of the earth, driving in my house, walking through the mall, walking downtown all the time, but that's that was a process to get me out of, imitating or doing what I think announcers should do, to actually becoming one that has a true technical skill set and a true delivery that, you know, I could legitimately call my own.
Michael, early on, did you have any tells? There are a few announcers that we figured out if cards are leaning a certain way, if their toe is going a certain way, we know who's going to get that decision. Did you ever have any tells early on in your career?
So I had people on Twitter who insisted that they knew, because they were going, because I was at the time I was actually watching Twitter. Sometimes I'd go on Twitter or something and I would say, you know, I got the scorecards, I'm coming up to the cage or whatever. And so I was following it closer at that time. I had people who were insisting that they knew. Oh, wait, when Michael C. Williams says this or does this first or that, you know, the winner is the blue corner. And they insisted that they knew. And they were probably right about 40, 50% of the time, because that's the odds. There's only two fighters. It's going to go one way or the other, but they insisted that they knew. Through that experience and kind of battling a little bit with some of the people, even through DMs, we're battling back and forth, and they insist that they knew or that I gave it away. Through that experience, long time ago, I purposefully make sure that I completely randomize it. I read the judges' scores in different orders. I never put things, and I can kind of keep track of it mentally over the course of a show, where if I did it this way last time, there was a split decision, 2 fights ago, another split decision again. I'm going to completely do it some other way just to twist it up so there is no tell. I never stand behind the winning fighter. I always try to stand right in the middle if I possibly can. Sometimes the producer wants me to shift, but that's not me. So I know what you're asking. And I know a lot of people, I get asked that question a lot, and it just makes me more and more conscious of making sure that there is no tell that gives it away. At least, listen, part of the definition of a tell is that the person doesn't know they're doing it, right? So maybe you can tell me if I have a tell.
No.
Can I jump in real fast just to follow up on this one? This one's interesting. Would you say that there's a cardinal sin in in-ring announcing if you do have a split decision? Let's say Goes and I fought, and we know I battered him round one. Not a 10-8, but still, I battered him. It was an easy 10-9. And then the other ones were close, right? If you have 3 judges' scorecards, you don't know how much I can't stand when they say 29-28 Goes, 29-28 George, and 30-27. That gave it away, because everyone knows there's no way I could have lost round one, and I wiped Goes off the mat in that round. And so basically I just ruined it. Do announcers think of that as well, to get the 30-27 out of the way, then the 29-28 the other way, and then the 29-28 will have us hanging, you know, clutching our pearls, I guess, for that extra 3 seconds. You know what I mean?
Right. I will tell you this, though. So I understand what you're asking, and I do it both ways, again, because I'm trying to randomize it. So I'm sure, I'm very confident that in split decisions, and there's been a lot of them over the years, of course, that you will have heard, if we go back, not that there's any interest or reason to do this, but if we go back, you'd probably obviously see 30-27 given once, you know, in the beginning, and then also given it as Judge 3. The thing about that, though, is again, if it's a real close fight, and there is the judges' scorecards, I know all the judges, and I think the judges. Listen, I'm going to probably get some flack for this. I'm a fan of a lot of the judges, because I have a deep appreciation for what they go through, and to judge a fight, and how difficult it is, how much scrutiny they're under. And I know a lot of them personally from, you know, almost 30 years in both sports, boxing and MMA. And I know that these judges are, I mean, they truly want to get it right. They are impartial and they're honest, and they really want to, okay. So, but there's so much about judges' scorecards now that sometimes if you do 29-28 this way, 29-28 that way, that's what everybody kind of expects. And they know it's going to be a split decision, right? But then when you give a little pause, a little strategic pause there, and then you go and judge number 3 scores at 30, and you pause again a little bit to 27. What I see in front of me is I see every cornerman in the ring every fighter, everyone in the front row. I see everyone just go, and all of a sudden the suspense and the emotion at that moment it overflows, it pops, because nobody can believe there's a 30-27 score. How could? So there's an element in there that can be, I don't know, kind of leveraged, if you will, or positioned, or and that's the kind of thing that makes it a little bit better. Maybe not a lot, but a little bit better, TV. So again, randomizing things as much as I can, so no one can pick up a tell, at least to the best of my knowledge. And then sometimes at 30-27, when it shouldn't be there, or maybe it should be there, but no one thinks it should, or feels it, or agrees that it should. Sometimes at the end, it provides a nice little right before the winner's announced.
Okay,
Michael. And so from the moment you get the fight ends to when you get the scorecards, not very many people know the outcome of this fight. How many people know what actually happened? And the reason I bring this up, and I hope this is starting to sound like an intervention for announcers here at this point, but I don't mean it to come that way. But over the weekend, Bruce Buffer, as he's walking into the cage, he kind of goes over to Sean Shelby, and you can tell he told him what the result was.
Right.
And Sean's reaction was, what? And he had this, and it kind of told us something crazy is about to happen, right? So I guess my question is, like, who needs to know all this, and how many people know before you actually give your answer?
So without any reference at all to this past weekend, the reference that you made about this past weekend and so forth, without respect to that at all. So many years ago, literally decades ago, what I learned being, so because I did non-televised shows forever and ever and ever, small little local and regional shows and back then there was no streaming either. So again, allow me to date myself dramatically. So prior to streaming, very few shows were televised. Once I started doing televised shows, I was doing ESPN Friday Night Fights for boxing, HBO Boxing After Dark, and these were bigger shows with big productions and a lot of high-level producers and directors that watched everything. So if something like that you just described happened and it originated from me, and I'm not going to say I did it or didn't do it at one point or another, by mistake, and then learn from that. Okay, I did. So that's how I learned. And I got read the riot act because there's cameras everywhere, right? They're picking up all this footage and they want that for, directors cutting the show how he wants to cut it, for whatever. Commentators are talking, right? They're trying to support the commentary with different camera shots. Anything like that, if it's happening somewhere around cage side, it's going to get picked up on camera somewhere. So I learned very early on, I don't know, nobody asks me. I don't tell anybody. So to answer your question directly, I know, the scorekeeper knows, the commissioner who's looking over the scorekeeper's shoulder and double checking, verifying, doing the math again and again, that person knows. And I have a producer, a floor producer with me. He knows. He and I are basically, literally, we are a wall behind the scorekeeper because everybody's sitting right over here. They're all trying to rubberneck over our shoulder to find out. We got fighters and corner, and God bless them. If I was a fighter or a corner, that's what I'd be doing. I'd be looking over the side of the cage, looking down to see if I could see it. There's eyeballs everywhere. So we are literally, and it's just what we've gotten into over the years. We basically surround the scorekeeper, and the only people that know is my floor producer, me, and the scorekeeper. That's it. Nobody else. Not even. So I'll step in the cage. Scott Coker looks at me, for example. Scott, right? He's president of the company. Scott looks at me. I look at Scott. I don't know if he can tell from my. I'm not trying to indicate anything, but we look at each other, and Scott has never once asked me who the winner was. I don't even think he wants to know. I think he wants to be. I think he wants to be in the moment too, as do other people. So that's how we address it. And again, I learned that lesson about cameras and it getting picked up many years ago. And it was a hard lesson to learn at the time, but it's paid off over the years, I guess.
That is cool, man. The wall that you guys built, because yes, I've seen it in other promotions. and I've seen the promoter be aware of who it is and stand behind, and then it's the announcer saying it, almost taking the step towards.
Yeah, before, right?
Now, granted, Goes and I are geeks. We're geeking out on every single detail. Maybe 99% of the world is just waiting for the announcement, but we're catching these 30-27s or this, like Goes said, someone stepping behind someone or whatever. Yeah. But I guess we were just always curious over, hey, if television's involved, I'm sure there's a trickle effect of some people just have to know, you know. But sounds like you guys kind of have a well-guarded secret there. What do you think? Like, so you probably know for about 30 seconds, unless you're coming back from a commercial or whatever. What are you thinking during that time? Have you ever seen two opposite 30-27s and just said, come on, guys, what are you thinking? Or have you ever just looked at the scorecards and you know you got to say a draw? You just know something is going to upset some people. Like, are you thinking it through, or do you just sticking to Michael C. Williams? I just got to deliver the news.
Well, so listen, I'm human too, right? And one of the best things about being, I'm sure you've heard other ring announcers say this. One of the best things about this job is that you get to sit cage side or ringside. You're right there. I mean, I get hit with blood and spit every show. I mean, how great is that? I mean, I'm right there, so I get to see, and I'm seeing angle. And there's always a judge beside me, right? And I always pay attention to who that judge is. And so in my head, I'm kind of thinking about, you know, who might have won that round. And the reason why I say there's a judge here is that judge's perspective is exactly the same as mine. But I can also look across the cage this way, and I can see the other two judges, and they can't see all the little hand fighting, for example, that I'm watching here in my corner, not corner, but you know, in my little area. So I know those three judges' perspectives, and you've heard Big John McCarthy says it all the time, and that's part of why judging is so tricky and it's so challenging for them. You know, as good intentioned as they are, their perspectives are wildly different. Whereas if you're home, you're watching whatever, you know, the camera's feeding your TV set, right?
Right.
But I'm always curious if this judge saw the fight the same way I do, and they don't always. And I defer. I'm like, well, then he's right. I'm not right. He's right. But when I pick up a scorecard, if it's a 3-round fight or a 5-round fight, right? You know, boxing, when I'm doing boxing, it's 10, 12 rounds, 8, 10, 12 rounds. But MMA, I mean, it's 3 or 5 rounds. So I can do that math, and I've gotten very good at MMA math, scorecard math. So as I'm standing over top of the scorekeeper, not that I've been asked to do it, maybe I'm not needed to do it. There's a scorekeeper and there's a commissioner there. They're doing the work, but I cannot help running through that math in my head. And I can add up the 10s and 9s and 8s and a few 7s. I can add that up, and so I'm adding it up. I get the totals oftentimes before they do.
Yeah.
And do my eyebrows, you know, could they peak sometimes? Probably. I mean, but I've just learned, as my floor producer has, we've both learned to be just stone-faced from the time that we're standing there to the time we walk around, you know, all the way, you know, and so it's again, the second that we do something or go, oh, you know, camera's going to find us, it's going to end up on the broadcast. It's inevitable. That's just Murphy's Law. So
have you ever been injured while standing there and doing an 8-hour show that you know, maybe it's a good story you can tell, maybe you had a broken pinky toe or you pulled a hamstring going upstairs, you know, I don't know, like, you ever had one of those where you're like, this is a long effing show?
Well, so I'll give you this short story. So I've never been physically injured. You know, that doesn't take long watching me to know that I don't have a lot of theatrics and movements. I mean, you know, the more you're moving, the more physiology you're wrapping in, the less airflow you have as an announcer. So for me, just my delivery, my style is I'm a little more, you know, I'm a little calmer, you know, physically, or my physiology's calmer, and I'm trying to push everything through my vocal delivery, right? So I really haven't had a good occasion to get injured, you know, physically. But there was a show, probably it was post-COVID, so in the last maybe year and a half, where I think it was the LA Forum too, if I'm not mistaken, I'm back. I'm hanging out. You know, Big John and Josh and I we're in the back. Moro, we're just waiting for showtime because we had rehearsal. We couldn't go back to the hotel. We got dressed at the arena, and we're just waiting. And I'm just waiting. And I'm eating something and we're waiting. And I get dressed. I'm all dressed and ready to go. And then one of my nostrils, one of my nose, it just starts pouring blood out. And I'm literally trying to catch it with So now I'm doing this. And then I got a cut man who's there, fortunately going, no, don't hold your head back. You got to hold your head forward. And so I'm just hanging out back there. I had about 15, 20 minutes and it wouldn't stop. Cut man had gone because he has got fighters, he's got more important people to take care of right before a show starts. So I end up then right before the first prelim kicks off with a big, huge pile of paper towels, going like this. I'm walking out to the side of the cage, and I got one of the cutmen who gave me. He goes, I can stop the bleeding, and I'm like, that's the advantage of having a cutman right there for this whatever the heck's going on here. I said, are you sure? Why is this happening? Because it never happened to me. Never happened before. Still don't know why it happened, but I'm about to go literally walk in the cage in minutes for the first prelim. And he goes, no, I can stop it. Trust me. And I'm like, but why is it happening? I don't know, but I can stop it. Trust me. And I said, what are you going to do? He goes, trust. So he lays me back and he shoots something up my nose, whatever it was. And he goes, it's coagulant, whatever, and he had me sit there for a second. He did this like this. And I think just to be funny, he smacked me upside the head and he goes, okay, stand up. And it stopped. Wow. And it didn't, it never started again that night, and it never happened again. I still don't know what he did, but his name's Matt Marsden. That's our cut man. He's been with Bellator for a long time. But I every time I see Matt, I'm like, remember that time?
So what would you have done? Would you have stuffed a little, some white gauze in there and just hope no one picks it up? Or wing it, but if you start bleeding, that could be obviously just as embarrassing.
So I had something stuffed in there, but it didn't hold. It didn't hold. That's why I had to walk out like this, because I had stuffed something in there and it didn't hold. That's why. So I don't know. But again, there's 3 cutmen at cage side, and there's 3 in the back. So I knew I could find, and their whole thing, blood is their thing. And when they see blood, they couldn't get any happier. So when I walked toward Matt like this, he was like, wow, this is great. He was at the time of his life. So without him though, I don't know. I guess I had to still do it. So I would have stepped in the cage and whatever.
I know we got to let you go. Let's just do these 2 quick ones. You've done the karaoke at some point with that voice. What's your karaoke go-to?
Okay. So full disclosure, I can't sing a note.
Really?
Can't sing a note. I can. Oh, wow. I can do voice imitations that I can sing in that voice. Oh, that's been a while, long time since I've done that. What's that?
Can you imitate? What do you imitate?
So
like a Simpsons character or something?
No, nothing like that. So I back in the day, like when and this goes because I was supplementing my income with this type of little work. But I was doing takeoffs of Marv Albert when he was doing the Michael Jordan, Patrick Ewing era.
Spectacular move. Remember that one?
Yeah. It's the NBA on NBC today. It's Michael Jordan. Now look, it's been 15 years, but that was the thing, and I would do riffs on that for recordings and for corporate events and things like that. But it's been a while. But no, back to your question. Can't sing a note.
Last one. Has there been a moment where you were just like, oh my God? I'll give you an example, and maybe you can use this one. When MVP delivered that knee to Cyborg's forehead, and he crushed his skull. Like, have you ever had just like a moment where you're like, oh my God, like maybe your stomach's upset, or you're just like, man, you got to look away?
So there's been, I mean, considered the sport. There's been a lot of them over the years. And I think the first one ever that happened was an early Bellator show. We were I just remember the cage we were in a theater. So it was cage on the stage. It was that kind of setup in the early days. And I remember the fighter's name was Jared, and I remember we didn't know what happened, but his knee dislocated. Mm-hmm. And he went to the ground and kept fighting, and no one could figure out. And he finished out the round. Didn't even know. No one really knew. His corner probably did. But no one else really knew if his knee was out or what was happening. Is he that flexible? And then when the round ended, he had to stand up and walk back to his corner. And we could all see that the bottom half of his leg was basically dangling. If you Google it, you'll find it. It's crazy. And so that was the first time that ever, in all the boxing I'd done and MMA prior, that was the first time I'd ever been like, what the? But then you mentioned MVP. I was there when MVP hit Cyborg with the knee in London, and Cyborg dropped. No one knew what happened, and then of course we found out later. And then MVP again. He just fought a guy. I think it's his last fight. He fought Goichi Yamauchi.
Yeah.
Goichi's fantastic. I mean, Goichi's been in Bellator forever. I've known him forever. He's the nicest guy in the world, and he's good. And he got a knockout stoppage over Neiman Gracie. And Goichi's a ground guy. He's a jiu-jitsu guy, and obviously so is Neiman. But he TKO'd Neiman, and then so Goichi's his time has come. And so they put him up against Page, against MVP, and then like in the first minute. The first time MVP threw a kick,
that was vicious.
Yeah. And so that's very fresh in my mind. I could still see that happen. I like both those guys a lot. I've known both them guys for a very long time, and to see that happen, I mean, it was a very dramatic moment. This was great, but it's hard to see that happen to a guy like Goichi who you know so well and you love and respect But there's been a whole bunch of others too, but those are the three that really stand out, and But yeah,
Michael, it's been great catching up with you. I know we have a heart out here. This is thevoice.com, folks. If you want to work with Michael on a personal level, there's also another one called liveeventannouncing.com. And again, he can mentor you, and he's got some free courses. There's some different types of personal one-on-one training. Check out the websites, and of course, catch them at every Bellator show, including the 23rd. That's the next one, Bellator 299, 11 a.m. start time because of the time difference. And that's Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. Johnny Evelyn competes that night. He defends his middleweight title against Fabian Edwards. Of course, you got the Bellator 300 with 4 title fights, Bellator 301, 2 title fights in the Windy City. So great way for Bellator to finish the year off strong. Thank you, sir, for coming back on Junkie Radio, and hopefully we can get together again soon. I had more questions, but we'll do it on another time. We had a blast with you.
All right, guys. I appreciate you having me.